Thank you. You can tell you're in New York when you get bigged up before you speak. It's like the Trump thing all over. Like, it's going to be the best speech. It's going to be a great guy. I promise it will totally underdeliver. But at the same time, I hope I can bring you just a couple of thoughts that might stick with you, some experiences, insights, and I don't know, maybe even a little bit of optimism. I'm struck at the moment, really, by. Has anyone here seen the movie Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom? Yeah. All right. Yeah, good. Hands up. You don't get that in Britain. Amazing. So participative. Right, good. In that case, this will make sense. So, look, you all know the scene. Indy's kind of sprinting through the temple. Arrows are flying. The floor's collapsing. There's a boulder bearing down. He dives under the stone of the door just as it slams shut. And then... obviously, he's so cool, he reaches back and grabs his hat. I honestly think that's roughly where we are in the energy transition today. The temple is the fossil fuel economy. The treasure is cheap, clean, abundant energy. But the door's closing. The boulder is the politics, the populism, and the incumbents doing everything they can to try and block us from getting to that future. And honestly, there are parts of the world where they may actually have won that fight. But there's enough parts of the world where we're already accessing the treasure. I think it's kind of game over. It's just a question of how long it takes for the whole world to grasp that and enjoy a much better future. Because I think that every time breakthrough technologies come along, incumbents rubbish it. Like, good competition makes us all better. We try to be better, but incumbents in competition don't try to outcompete and deliver better solutions. They try to pull their challengers back. So it's not the thrilling 100-meter final of two great athletes sprinting for the line. Instead, it's the one that disappoints us all, the lack of sportsmanship if someone's cheating. And examples from the past. Did you know that when trains were first invented, the horse industry and the canal industry, right, said that passengers would suffocate in tunnels, cows would stop giving milk, women would faint, and no human could survive 30 miles an hour. When bikes first emerged, the horse industry managed to find doctors who warned of bicycle face, a permanent grimace, especially dangerous, by the way, for women. And in Britain, when cars were invented, we had to have a guy walking in front of it with a red flag at 4 miles an hour in case it went too fast. And look, I'm so sorry to do this to a news organisation, but in 1995, Newsweek said, and no one will get their news online. Nothing will replace newspapers, or indeed shopping. So I just use those as examples because today I think we're in a world where, look, what do you hear? You say, we've got this incredible demand for energy for data centers, can only be met by gas and maybe new nuclear. Forgive me, but it's horseshit, right? Let me move on to some of what's really happening in the world. Oh, by the way, just back on that, you'll also hear that EVs catch fire. I don't know, did you know that gasoline, catch fire 60 times more frequently than EVs? Right? You'll hear about human rights issues in the EV supply chain. It's genuinely true, but we're already able to pinpoint and clamp down on those. It's the very same people that have turned a blind eye to the human rights issues in fossil fuels for many, many decades. Like, the reality is, the incumbents here are throwing everything they can at stopping the progress because they are terrified of what's to come. I recently experienced what I can only describe as a time machine. It was actually last year in this very event. I came here from China, and I'd been in Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing. The roads were quiet. All the two-wheel vehicles were now electric, all of them. Taxis, pretty much all electric. Buses, all electric. Trucks, largely electric. Delivery vans, and increasingly private cars were electric. The roads were quiet, far quieter than I'd ever known before. And actually the air was obviously far cleaner than it had been. And I arrived in New York. Now, I know that this week is not the most typical, but when you see those Chevy Suburbans sitting idling, those huge trucks belching out local pollution. For the first time ever, it felt like coming to New York was not a trip into the future, but it felt like a trip to an increasingly Stone Age past. And I think, first of all, the economics of this and what driving. I'm not saying that China are nice people, they may or may not be. I honestly can't speak for an entire nation. What I can say is that they saw the future and started investing in the stuff that will displace fossil fuels. The Chinese state oil company is planning no petrol stations to exist in China by 2045. Right? That's not just China. In Norway now, 97% of the cars sold this year are electric. So the world's changing. It's just maybe not all of it at the same pace. But it's not being held back by a lack of technology. It's just being held back by that incredible pull of incumbents. And let me just tell you how genuinely sickening I find that. It's bad enough in industries like, bicycles, whatever. But look, recently, I was sat at an event next to the CEO of one of the oil majors. I get on well with them. And frankly, my company is a clean energy company, but we're currently the second biggest seller of gas in the UK, because people need to heat their homes. It's just we desperately want to replace that with things like heat pumps. But this guy sat there and told me that he is absolutely loving life at the moment, going around the world selling gas contracts because that's the only way to power data centers. And that Africa can't use renewables, apparently. I mean, it didn't have a good answer when I talked about the fact it's got the greatest solar resources in the world, but we'll get onto that. What really struck me was another person in the conversation said, what about the climate? And he said, well, 1.5 is shot. He's probably right, by the way. But he said, internally, we're planning on 2.75 degrees. And the guy said to him, what does that mean for climate? And without hesitation, the big oil CEO said, 6 feet of sea level rise, right? 6 feet. And there wasn't a bit there that was said, like, look, when the guy said, what can we do about it? He said, well, mitigate. He said, there's no hope of prevention. We need the energy. And when I said, who's going to pay for the mitigation? Is it taxes on oil and gas? He said, well, if you need the energy, it's not that. So you end up in this circular argument, which is, if you want the energy, you've got to have the sea level rise, but you're not going to pay the cost of it. I said to him, you treat this like it's inevitable. He said, well, you can't invest in renewables in Africa, it's not going to work. I said, well, you spent decades and decades not worrying about Africa. How come all of a sudden it's the most important thing? And, you have no answer. And I said, look, how do you look your kids in the eyes and tell them about this 6 feet of sea level rise? Because you know that 6 feet of sea level rise isn't just higher sea levels. It's weather chaos that will destroy populations, right? And he looked blankly, and I said, how do you look your kids in the eyes and tell them they may never have kids if we follow this future? And he had no answer. The tragedy is we don't have to do this, right? We absolutely don't have to do it. Let me tell you the great news, right? Mazda, funded by the oil industry of Abu Dhabi, but replacing oil, not trying to defend it, have announced data centers, 24/7 power for data centers, at 6 cents a kilowatt hour, using sun and battery. That is cheaper than powering them with gas. And unlike gas, there isn't a 5-year queue for turbines. You don't need you could be building it today. Let me tell you some more good news. The secret of this is solar power and battery power. Solar power is now so cheap that there are places in the world where it's cheaper to build a fence using solar panels than wood panels, right? Literally ubiquitous. The average price of electricity on African grid is 25 cents a kilowatt hour. By the way, in the US, it's 15 cents. In the UK, 26 cents. You can generate electricity from solar in sunny regions at 1.2 cents a kilowatt hour. And the batteries that we need to store and use that energy, the rule of thumb in planning scenarios has been $1,000 a kilowatt hour, because that's where they were like roughly 10 years ago. Right now, the global price of batteries is about $100 a kilowatt hour. It's come down tenfold in 10 years. But actually, they're transacting in China at $52, And CATL, the world's biggest battery company, just announced batteries at $10. Now, they're not on the market yet, but it'll be next year, maybe the year after. That's a 100-fold reduction in the price of storing electricity. Ember, the energy consultancy, have worked out that battery and solar is cheaper than gas for powering data centers 97% of the time in the sunniest US states. So I kind of look at a world right now where on the one hand, we are being taken for a ride, being told that the need for AI data centers, population growth, and air conditioning is going to require a huge new drill baby drill future. And at the same time, in the real world, the cost of the technologies to avoid the need for that altogether is plummeting, absolutely plummeting. And by the way, look, you'll be told this is driven by cheap labor in China or by state subsidies. The reality is it's not. It's just driven by relentless innovation in research and development. Every Chinese company I visited when I was there spent between 6% and 11% of their revenue on research and development for these technologies. It means that in the same way that the phone in your pocket, we all know, like 100,000 times more powerful than the space program or something, right? That is the same curve that we're following for solar and battery. And 74% of all of the renewables being built in the world right now are being built in China. But the factories that are churning out those renewables at ever lower costs, once they've kind of saturated the market in China, that's going to be spilling out over the rest of the world. It's going to spill out over East Asia, over Latin America, over Africa, bringing clean energy to the 700 million people who don't have energy at all. So I guess for me, while we're here, and the advice given to me is not to talk about climate change because it's going to upset some people, and is not to talk about clean energy because it's going to upset some people, and not to talk about the extent to which, honestly, we use a little bit of gas when the sun's not shining, when it's not blowing, that's okay. But we don't need that as our base power anymore, right? I should very briefly talk about that a little bit. I don't know whether you know this. An electric car powered 100% by electricity generated from gas has lower emissions than a gasoline car. A heat pump, where all electricity comes from gas, has lower emissions than a gas furnace. Electrification is the key to tackling climate change. And if you have a little bit of gas until we fully electrify the back end, that's okay. But the future is electric, it's increasingly clean, and it's driven by astonishing progress in solar and batteries. So I think that as society, we should be absolutely confident. In fact, we should be as cool as Indiana Jones as we dive underneath this closing door. We should grab our hat and be absolutely overjoyed that the future genuinely is going to be solar, battery, wind, EVs, and heat pumps. And it's just possible that next time I meet that CEO, I can tell him that there's a whole bunch of people in this room who'd rather have that than 6 feet of sea level rise. Thank you.
Well, that was a rip-roaring argument with optimism of why we should all be thinking that there is going to be a way forward. And I can remember as a child that people always said, oh God, solar energy is going to be the future. But actually, finally, wind, solar, electric is going to have that breakthrough in our lifetime, isn't it?
Hey, look, there are parts of the world where you wouldn't even be asking that question now. I don't know how you will do, but if that was 40 years ago,
early 30s.
Okay, well in that case, no.
Yeah.
But 40 years ago, solar power was about 300 times more expensive than it is today per unit generated. I mean, that's remarkable. It's literally followed the same curve as computing, so in just the same way. What was it the chairman of IBM said in the 1950s? There'll be a worldwide market for 5 computers, right? I'm currently wearing at least 3. I kind of think we totally fail to grasp the astonishing power of exponential improvement. But this change is happening. I think, by the way, the US is the first time I was sitting in the office of the US utility CEO, and he explained that they had a monopoly and they ran the system, and there was no competition. I was like, hell, this is meant to be the land of the free. Right? Where does innovation come from? How do you... So the US is sadly, because of these kind of regulatory constructs, one of the least innovative energy markets in the world. But in Germany now, people just buy solar panels down their equivalent of Home Depot, plug them in at home, sit on the balcony, and reduce their energy costs 30-40%.
But so in Britain, there is an argument going on over the cost of living versus the cost of the planet.
Yeah.
And people are not particularly happy that there is a surcharge on their bill, which is seemingly in order to enable us to be ahead in the race to try and be pure with energy. Is that right?
Like all new technologies, if you use it wrong, honestly, it's worse than not having it at all. I don't know, like a Porsche is a better car than a Fiat, but you don't want to do your shopping in a Ferrari. You know what I mean? Now the reality is you've got to use these things correctly to get the benefits. With Octopus, by the way, in the UK, our customers enjoy free electricity on sunny afternoons, on windy afternoons. If they live near a wind farm, they get half-price electricity when it's windy. If they've got an electric car, they just pair it with us. They use technology to connect it. And we automatically charge the car when it's windy and when it's sunny. For them, electricity is 3 times cheaper than normal grid price, 6 times cheaper than driving a gasoline car. If they've got a battery that goes both ways, that is, you've got a car where we can discharge the battery back into the grid, we'll give you 12,000 miles of free driving every year because we can fill the battery up with cheap electricity, windy and sunny times, put some of it back on the grid, sell some of it back to the grid at expensive times, and then use the money we've made from that to buy a bit more for driving. And in return, you literally get free driving. So what we've got is you're increasingly seeing these 2-track systems in a lot of countries now. People who've got access to their own renewable resources, their own new energy solutions like batteries, are enjoying cheaper energy than ever before. They can take themselves completely off the gas grid and their electricity goes vanishingly cheap. People who are stuck with the analog world of badly regulated grids with outdated rules for how they provide the power, and seeing prices go up. And that's not sustainable, by the way, but that's how Spotify came about.
So you are in a position, Greg has just been appointed as a non-executive director to the Cabinet Office of the British government. So he's not going to be directly talking about energy, but there will be conversations where you will be talking about innovation, and innovation includes this whole sector. Are we pretty backward? And how do you get the public behind you? Because at the moment the public are not totally convinced in Britain.
They're not. It's fascinating. Right? We run surveys of people's views. 48% of British people support net zero. 21% oppose it. If energy prices keep going up, support collapses to 13%.
Yep.
If energy prices go down, opposition collapses. Right? This is not about net zero. It's about price. Now the reality is, I'm not going to here demonise the fossil fuel companies. I mean, in many ways, they're just doing what every incumbent industry has ever done before. I had some examples there. But the renewable industry, the reality is they're not all good people too. The way in which the renewable industry has been built around government programs, subsidies, price guarantees, ends up being counterproductive at some stage because they're not thinking about how they provide value to consumers. So, the reality, for example, the UK, the biggest wind farm we have in Britain is paid to not generate 71% of the time because it was built where there's insufficient grid to deliver the electricity.
This is millions of pounds, isn't it?
I mean, there's many, many millions. The UK alone will hit £1 billion of payments to wind farms and replacement.
For not producing.
Yeah, for not producing this year. It'll be £8 billion a year by 2030. Because what they're not doing is what I described earlier. Octopus customers, we give them free electricity when it's windy. Yeah. Right? Use that power and suddenly reduce the average price. But instead, our outdated markets pay them to just turn off the blades. You see this, by the way, across the world.
So let me take you back, because you are a pioneer and you're a giant in this industry. But it began when you were growing up with your electricity being cut off. Can you remember that? Can you take us through that? And was that a trigger moment for you to think, I do not want to be in a world where one's vulnerability, economic vulnerability, means no heat, no light?
Well, I mean, like, it was actually gas. It was my mum's gas bill, but my mum had 3 kids, and she worked in a bar in the evenings as a student by day, and just couldn't make ends meet. I think what that taught me though is that for millions of households, energy bills are cripplingly painful, and that's in many countries. It's a big political issue here in the US. It's a political issue in Europe. It's a political issue in the UK. By the way, it's not a political issue in countries like China. Really interesting, totally different landscape. But here, and in the UK and others, we create this crazy world where green energy was a premium product. Where, like, literally, we said like
organic food.
Yeah, it's a bit, but with organic food, in theory, at least you're doing yourself good. With green energy, you're doing everyone else good. You're the sucker that's paying for them. Is like the mentality we create. Now, this is it's the worst marketing I've ever seen. In that, like I was just talking there about how astonishingly cheap renewables can be. So in parts of the US, you can generate solar electricity for less than 2 cents a kilowatt hour, and people are paying 10 or more for their power, right? What we don't have is a route to market for this cheap power, because we built our system in a world where that didn't exist. So you just have a kind of homogeneous and one-size-fits-all price, rather than saying to people, like, if people knew that they could get, if they could get unbelievably cheap power at sunny times, they'd save their washing up. It's not a chore. People are saying to me like, oh, people don't want to do this. But it's like in supermarkets, you've got thousands of special offers in order to, when there's a big crop of strawberries are cheap. When the food is about to go off, they sell it cheap. But in electricity, we don't do that. We just have enormous waste.
When the big energy companies, big oil companies in particular, claim that they're going green, that they are changed, that they have done a Damascene conversion, do you believe them?
Well, I think they tried. Genuinely, they tried. They could see this coming. You can remember that it was the oil industry that were among the first credible organisations to spot climate change. Yeah. And at first, they tried to use that information to bury it, but eventually they accepted this is going to be an issue. And BP in the 1990s rebranded itself Beyond Petroleum, and they meant it. But back then, for example, they were building solar farms. They were 200 times more expensive, 100 times more expensive than they are today. They were ahead of their time. Similarly, Shell started building a lot of renewable stuff, but it's just not what they were good at, and therefore they couldn't make money and they retreated. But we've seen that in every other energy, every other transition. So Kodak invented the digital camera, didn't know how to make money out of it, and retreated. Rupert Murdoch saw social media. He bought MySpace and killed it, right? Because new technologies behave differently than old ones. Incumbents are not necessarily good, and there's good at it. And I think there's a real problem in energy. The governments expected they would be able to work hand in hand to provide a just transition for example, the oil industry. And they asked the oil industry to deliver the transition. And it's not that the oil industry didn't want to, it's just they don't know how.
So what's Octopus going to be doing in 10 years' time? How big will it be? What sort of energy will it be providing? What will be the sales pitch to go to be, or will you be out of business because you've been so successful, energy is free?
Well, it's really, so the hardware for energy is a great business, right? Solar and battery as a combo is going to be just absolutely astonishingly big. Now we happen to be, as a company, we operate in 30 countries. We're based in the UK, where it's not suddenly that often. So what we're going to need is really smart technology that balances wind, solar, battery, grid, interconnectors from other countries. And so, frankly, within our company, the technology we built to do this, platform called Kraken, is worth more than Octopus, because the reality is that around the world.
Explain that what it is to people.
Well, so Kraken it's like an operating system for utilities. And what I was going to say is, like, you imagine that every grid around the world looks like an old minicab office, an old taxi office. You've got a bunch of people with phones. Literally today, every grid around the world is run by people with phones. In fact, sometimes faxes. Faxing power stations to turn them on and off to balance the grid. And yet, we're at a stage where you have millions of generating points, solar panels on people's roofs, in farms and fields, wind turbines that turn on and off depending on the wind, batteries that need to be, it's very complex choosing when to charge a battery, because if you charge it too soon, it's not available if you've suddenly got a glut of electricity. So you need to really clever forecasting when to charge and discharge. And you've got batteries at grid scale, right down to batteries in individual electric vehicles and individual houses. We need to make this system, it's going to go from being a mini cab office, a taxi office, to being Uber. Just vast amounts of data being matched at a location and a time to grab this electricity and use it cheaply and to optimize all of these different assets.
So are you going to be increasingly going to be a technology and data company?
Well, I think, look, first of all, Kraken literally is. Like, to give you an idea that in the UK alone, which has got quite a dynamic electricity market, it's too expensive, it's dynamic. We process 300,000 rows of data every second to optimize it. That's 30 times more data than Visa does globally for payments. That's the kind of management we are going to need of grids and distribution networks and of electric devices in order to ensure that that very cheap electricity I've just talked about coming from solar, from onshore wind, offshore wind, whatever, gets to consumers and businesses in the most efficient way possible. So that's already it's already happening. I think as a company as a whole, you asked that question about 10 years. 2 years ago, every grid in the world has been one of these 10, 15, 20-year plans. Not one of them foresaw the astonishing, precipitous rise in demand that will be driven by AI, as an example. All the plans straight out the window. And so I think the world of electricity is going to change more than anyone realizes over the next few years. I'll give you another example, actually. I talked earlier about with a car with a bi-directional battery, we can provide free driving. At the moment, 12,000 miles a year. Just in the UK, but the same applies everywhere, I just know the UK numbers better. But in the UK, when 75% of cars are moved to electric with bi-directional batteries, total UK emissions fall 55%. Because we can use those batteries to mean we don't really need the gas backup anymore, the vast majority of the time. Those cars will have 75 gigawatts of battery, and the UK is a 50 gigawatt system. The batteries are bigger than the system.
But it's painful. I've got an electric car, and sometimes I have to drive 30 miles in order to find, hopefully it's still working, a charger which hopefully is a speedy one rather than a slow one. And there is this, as we've discussed, no one ever goes back from an electric car, or very, very rarely. So once you've gone electric, you're converted. But it is often that sense of fear of running out of juice is real.
It's partially real for some people some of the time. Like, the reality is, in Europe, America's slightly different, but in Europe, the average commute is 11 miles. And the average EV battery is 300.
Yeah.
So for your daily drive, it's quite hard to use your battery up, right? And, you can plug in at home and it's 6 times cheaper than driving a petrol car. People say to me, but not everyone's got a driveway, no one's got a garage. It's like, no one can charge a petrol car at home, right? Isn't it astonishing the extent to which new technologies are held to these standards of perfection that don't apply in the other world? But increasingly, as electric cars...
the 5-minute charge up is going to be with us soon, isn't it?
Yeah, well, BYD are already selling cars that can charge in 5 minutes. See, it's very much like your mobile phone. Look, I got it out just because I can then wave it around. One of the things that stopped Nokia creating a proper smartphone was they thought a battery needed to last for a week, right? Apple realized that if you had an incredible device, you'd be quite happy to charge it every day. And I bet most people in this room have got what I've got. So I've got a power bank in my bag, plus a USB-C cable, which I can use as my laptop as the ultimate last resort charger. Because the benefits of this device are so great that you're quite happy to change your charging habit from the old world. And in the same way, look, you talked about occasionally you might get a bit stressed, you've got to find a charger. That's getting rarer and rarer. Chargers are being rolled out in most countries very, very rapidly because there are more and more EVs. I drive past petrol stations with a sense of relief that I'll never have to stop at one again. I don't know about the rest of you, but you didn't realise that if you've got an EV, you didn't realise what a pain in the arse a petrol station was until you no longer have to do it. And now you're absolutely free. You only stop when you need to go to the toilet. If you've got an EV, it's got a 300-mile range, the battery will outlast your bladder, right? And if you've got kids, there is nothing better than plugging the car in, having 20 minutes, 25 minutes, out of the car just to while it charges itself.
It's a nanny service. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, but all I'm saying to you is, honestly, it's just transformative, and that's why 96% of people who got an EV will never go back.
Yeah.
Right, they're simply better in every way. There's no oil changes, no filters. They've got regenerative braking, so you never need to change the brake discs, the brake pads. Genuinely are. It's bonkers that anyone feels otherwise.
The most powerful man in the world is a few blocks away in New York as we speak. Drill, baby, drill. What would you say to him?
Well, no, I mean, first of all, I'm not going to change his mind, right? So that's fine. But the reality is,
you might change his mind. Have a go.
No, look, looking at the long tail of history, economics and physics tends to win in the long run, right? In the long run, economics and physics wins. The great tragedy could be.
But he would buy the economic argument. He's a business guy. So what would you tell him?
Well, yeah, except you've got to make leaps of faith into seeing a different system than you have today. And if people choose not to see that, that's fine, right? Like the US is long oil and gas because you've got loads of oil and gas reserves, right? China is long electricity because it's got no oil and gas. However, the technology advances driven by their need to escape oil and gas mean that actually the solutions that are being generated there are cheaper. And what's going to happen is, all the factories that today are churning out unbelievably cheap solar and wind turbines and batteries and EVs in China for Chinese domestic consumption, it's like filling a bath. And when the bath's full, it's all going to spill over the side into other countries. And you're going to see, across a whole pile of countries, they're going to be able to drive for a fraction of the cost of Americans.
So what
they're going to be able to power their homes for a fraction of the cost of Americans. They're going to be able to attract industry for a fraction of the cost. When that happens, then you'll see big change here. The sad thing is, it may be a race that America could have benefited from. At the end of the day, Tesla, an American company, is probably the West's kind of greatest driver of this change. Probably helped drive a lot of the competition from China, and it would be great to see. Frankly, it would be great to see America and Europe doing a lot better in this race than they are. With
petrostates changing the politics of the world, are we going to see a changing of politics with wind, sun? Yeah. Are particular countries going to rise? And very high-performing economies usually leads to high-performing politics.
The fascinating thing I've seen is the Middle East. Again, there's no part of me here saying these are good countries or bad countries. There's no judgment. It's just looking at the change that's happening. But Sheikh Mohammed of Abu Dhabi, I think in 2014 or 2015, did a speech. It's a brilliant speech on YouTube in which he described, he said in 50 years' time, as we watch the last barrel of oil being exported from our country, we won't mourn it, we will celebrate it. And in fact, we'll probably export it long before that. And what they did was they set themselves on a path to say, look, today our economy is entirely oil and gas. But first of all, one day it's going to run out. And by the way, as a non-democracy, it's a bad thing, obviously. But we've got a many-decade horizon. Climate change is going to be very real for us. So we've simultaneously got to run our lives the way we are today, but build that future that will displace it. And they created the company Masdar, one of the world's biggest renewable energy companies. I think it's targeted to be top 3 in the world by 2030. That's created things like the 24/7 solar battery power plant, cheaper than gas. Saudi Arabia, again, a complex country, but they're currently building 3 interconnectors to ship clean electricity generated from their enormous solar resource into 3 separate continents. Those kind of countries are actually building the technology that will displace their existing industries. Now, they will hope, by the way, it's quite funny, obviously, they all hope that they'll get to roughly the point when it's no longer economically viable to extract oil and gas, just as they get to the point that future's built. But they are building it, and I think that is really salutary, because you see this as you build this stuff, it compounds, the efficiency compounds. And so what you're going to see is the change is going to happen faster than you imagine. China, I mentioned earlier, they set their 2030 clean energy goal in 2019, and they hit it in 2024. By the way, they didn't stop. they just carried on. So it's exponential beyond that. And that's what happens when you embark on these changes.
What a tour d'horizon of our energy, of our global possibilities and our potential and the thrills and spills of being an entrepreneur. Greg, that was a terrifically informative, surprising, and alluring and infectiously enthusiastic rendition of where we are today. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Well, thank you, Jordan. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Why is it, or when would it be,
Yeah.
why is it that the Chinese production of the hardware that we so desperately need, I was unaware that a lot of it was still locked up in China and waiting for that bath to overflow.
Yeah.
What opportunity, there must be opportunities there entrepreneurially to get in on it early.
I think there are huge opportunities right now. First of all, China's got its goals to hit, and it's got a habit of hitting its goals. And so an awful lot of that production has currently got a huge domestic market. I think the reason I describe like the bath will overflow is that as they saturate the domestic market, they're not going to shut the factories down, right? They're just going to send salespeople to every country around the world. And by then, the technology was so astonishingly cheap, it's a no-brainer. I think we're already at the point where you are better off mothballing a fossil fuel plant and replacing it with Chinese renewables than keeping it running for its life. In many parts of the world. So you kind of the economics is already just about there. It's just that they've got an enormous home market to absorb it first.
They're just hard to buy.
It's not hard to buy. It's just if you're China and you can sell 10,000 wind turbines to a single province next month, why would you bother going through the 6-year process of flogging 50 of them to Britain? Right? Honestly, it's just so easy it's just so easy for them there at the moment.
Greg, Jordy mentioned you were advising the UK government in some capacity. You recently said that the government could save a ton of money by simply no longer investing in the technology of carbon removal and storage. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, look, I think, first of all, I've got to put that in perspective, which is that I personally have invested in carbon removal platforms, particularly in things like building. But for power alone, just on power, cutting the cost of electricity is the single most important thing you can do to electrify an economy. As soon as electricity gets cheaper, people will naturally choose electric cars. Batteries become dramatically more efficient. People will choose heat pumps, and industry will use electrification of heat. So cheap electricity is critical. In the UK at the moment, electricity is 4 times more expensive per kilowatt hour than gas. In France, electricity is only twice as expensive. So the UK in particular just has to get its electricity prices down. The government currently plan to put electricity prices up even further to put carbon capture on a small number of power plants yet to be built. The total cost of that would be £22 billion, so I don't know, nearly $30 billion. 2026, I know, 27. If you care about emissions, you will be better off not putting bills up to pay for that, but instead cutting electricity bills. And as I said earlier, a heat pump will use less will have lower emissions than a gas furnace, even if the electricity came from gas. So you're better off just having unabated gas for cheap electricity. By the way, in many other parts of industry, carbon capture is a great idea.
Question.
Hi, my name is Trisha. I'm a clean energy reporter at Morning Brew. Just wanted to ask, a big issue that a lot of solar and wind companies are having in the U.S. is kind of this elevated review that the Trump administration has put on the Department of the Interior here. I know you guys have a U.S. presence. I guess any advice or any thoughts that you might have for solar companies that are struggling with this kind of longer permitting process, but also seemingly disadvantaged treatment from the Trump administration?
First of all, by the way, for me, it's a huge privilege to be asked a question by Morning Brew, right? As an entrepreneur, when you start from nothing and one day you get asked that question. So thank you. But actually, I don't have a good answer right now because honestly, I think that the challenge here is you've gone from a world where, under previous administrations, solar and wind would receive subsidies to a world where they've got to jump through hoops that fossil fuels don't have to. And that is the power of incumbency. And I think, look, I love the US, right? And I'm thrilled to the diversity of 50 states that was different as different countries of Europe. But it is a country in which regulation and incumbent lobbying, combined with a lot of litigation, can make business very, very different than, in theory it's free markets, but it's only free markets where it's free. Energy is the least free market, and I think it's disastrous. So I can't answer your direct question. What I can say is, honestly, free markets are so critical now in energy. Someone said to me, it's a great thinker, a guy called Rory Sutherland said, markets aren't necessarily always efficient, but they're a great place to have contestability of ideas and discover new stuff. And I really worry that in the US, actually what's happening is you're not going to get the contestability that enables you to say, look, solar plus batteries, a great way, you deliver 97% of the power required for a data center in sunny states. You can do that today. And instead, the regulation may prevent it. But I genuinely, I'm so sorry, I don't know enough about those rules.
No, that's okay.
But let's talk about Morning Brew later, though. Thank you.
Hi there. That was fantastic. I'm Danny. I'm an Octopus customer. My account is all paid and up to date.
So just checking.
A question: you haven't spoken about kind of the role of nuclear in the mix, and I asked that question with kind of knowledge or understanding that the technology platforms in particular are investing in recommissioning nuclear. What's your kind of view on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. First of all, I've got no problem with nuclear. Octopus buys a lot of nuclear power from our friends at EDF. Europe, including the UK, has not been good at building infrastructure projects. And nuclear typically involves big infrastructure projects. So recommissioning existing plants is not as hard as building brand new ones. And our track record on building stuff means that your concern is that the plans for new nuclear look expensive a long way away. And our experience, not just in the UK, but in many countries in Europe, is that we don't deliver on budget or on time, so it's only going to be worse than that. It would be genuinely great to have a properly modular, replicable nuclear solution. But if I give you an example, I visited a construction site for a new nuclear plant in the UK a couple of weeks ago. And as a technologist, it filled me with dread when I was hearing some of the stories there. So I'll just give you one example of what goes wrong with nuclear and regulation. The team building it proudly told us about the fact they've got a triply redundant computerized instrumentation and control system. That's good, everyone has that. And they said, but on top of that, we've got a triply redundant, non-computerized backup. First of its kind in the world. I was like, LA. The one thing you don't want in safety critical things is first of its kind in the world. Right? No one wants to fly the Wright brothers plane. When we asked them about this, they said, well, what happened was, by the way, they're really proud of it now. They said it's in 2012, 13 years ago, this is still under construction. The regulator said, look, we know you've got this kind of instrumentation control system that's the same as everyone uses in the world. In fact, every industrial plant in the world uses basically the same stuff. Nuclear uses a slightly hardened version, it's the same. He said, but what if computers fail? And what do you mean? Oh, what if all the computers fail? That's literally never happened in the history of computer, but okay, They said, so you need a non-computers backup. They spent 3 years arguing over it. Eventually they gave in just because they wanted to build a plant. To incorporate a non-computerized backup system, they need a lot of wires. The wires all need cooling and ventilation. So they needed to, first of all, massively up-spec the cooling ventilation. Because it's nuclear, there are only 2 companies in the world that made high enough spec cooling ventilation plants, but you need triply redundant. You've got to find another company and teach them how to make it. And then they've got to redesign the reactor core to carry all the extra cables and the cooling and the ventilation. The whole thing, just because a regulator decided, asked that question, the pointless question, by the way, the whole thing has added tens or hundreds of millions of pounds, and frankly added risk. It was the same when we looked at the lining of the reactor core. And these are all based on a French design, which uses reflective metal. In Britain, we use fibre. So anyway, the point really being, regulators can't help themselves, particularly on stuff like this. And I think as a result, I'd love new nuclear, but I'd need new regulators first.
Very good. Thank you, Greg. Just outstanding.
Do you want one more?
I have a question. I'm not an expert I'm just very curious. But I have a question about your opinions of AI data centers and water, because I know that that's popping up, those AI data centers popping up all over the world. And I know that the conversation about cooling them down is big, and I was just curious about your opinion.
Well, first of all, good news. I'm not going to give you a long answer because I know loads about energy. I don't know anything about water. And so I actually can't answer the question on AI data centers and water. I can very briefly say that I think AI data centers and energy is a very solvable problem. For the next couple of years, the people building just want plug and play simple solutions. But as we start to provide, like, it's the job of the energy sector to do a much better job than just plugging them into the grid and complaining there's not enough capacity. But if we can give them great solutions that combine clean energy, we can definitely solve the energy bit. I suspect, we'll probably solve water too. But I genuinely don't know, so sorry. Thank you.